We have a great panel here and talk about my favorite subject, investigative journalism, which is exploding around the world, and it's kind of a contradiction. We're facing a backlash that is in some cases unprecedented. Space for civil society, for independent media, for democracy is shrinking. I have a staff in 8 countries that spends the first hour of every day aggregating what's happening to investigative journalism, and it's not a pretty picture. We're getting the crap kicked out of us in about 100 countries every day. And even in places where we thought we were relatively secure, the United States, Britain, we have our backs to the wall. And that's the bad news. Here's the good news. We have more journalists doing better work with more advanced tools in more places than ever before. GIJN's membership, since we set up our nonprofit in 2012, has tripled. Our followers on social media have exploded. We've got 165,000 followers on a dozen platforms. We have journalists from 100 countries a day coming to our website for tools and techniques to follow the money, to go after corruption, to ask tough questions of people who have power in our societies. And we're not going away. It's when I get depressed, I look at the mail we get every day of these courageous journalists on the front lines, like you know, these 3 guys to my left. And it's just remarkable what people are doing, often for little money, little recognition, because they believe in leaving the world a little better than they found it. They believe in righting wrongs, and they believe in telling the truth. So there's a lot of exciting things that that are happening. One of my mentors likes to say that there were never any good old days in investigative journalism. It's always been a struggle. When you go after powerful people and powerful institutions, there's pushback. You face lawsuits, you face intimidation and harassment. It's a fight to get resources. You have to convince sometimes the battles in your own newsroom are the biggest impediment. But as I say, we're growing. We're not going away, and there's something extraordinary that's happening. And it's partly because of globalization. The communications and technology revolutions have given us tools that we could have only dreamed about even 10 years ago. When you look at something like the Panama Papers or Paradise Papers that KCIJ has done, you know, this is a virtual network linked by collaborative software and secure communications that is working in 80 countries. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, I used to run KCIJ way back when, and you know, we were still using faxes and regular email. So a lot has changed, and a lot is possible. So the technology really has become our friend, and we're using it to keep fighting the good fight. Okay, so enough from me. I want to start with Torben, who is finishing 5 years as the director of the journalism program for the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, based here in Singapore. And Torben, I'd like to get your assessment. Now that you're going back to Europe, you know, there's been a lot of pushback. In some ways, we've lost a lot of ground. At the same time, I've watched you very strategically make a number of investments in investigative journalism in the region that have paid off. So give us your assessment.
Okay, thank you, David. Before I start answering the question, let me know, or let me say, as a political scientist, it's really tough for a German Conservative Party member to be on the right of a Democratic Party from the US. But beside this, of course, I still remember, and I have to tell this story again, 2014. On the East-West Center conference in Myanmar, we met first, and I was quite new. I started mid of 2013 my term as director of the media program Asia from Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and David approached me. He wore almost the same outfit like today, and he told me, you know, he said,
we don't have to get so personal here, do we?
I'm from GIJN, and I would like to do an investigative conference in Asia, and I thought this guy is crazy. Yeah, so maybe he's a suicide person or whatever.
He still thinks this, so this is immaterial.
But doing investigative journalism in a region like Asia, where press freedom is really, really down in so many countries, this will be a big, big challenge. However, he convinced me, so overnight I thought about this idea, and I said, actually, what KS is doing is promoting democracy all over the world. It's what I told in my welcome remarks and everything. So for me as a media program, I should promote the fourth estate of a checks and balance system of a modern democracy. And what else is better than investigative journalism? This is the watchdog journalism. This is actually the core of the fourth estate, right? So I found the fund, and I said, okay, let's try it. And this was, I guess, in March or May, so early the year, and he wanted to do it at a conference in November, so just 6 months. And I said, okay, let's do it. The first approach was Thailand, Bangkok. We said, okay, let's go there. It's a fantastic place to do a conference. But then the coup happened. Yeah. So we said, okay, shit, where to go now? And we ended up in the Philippines. So that was the way within 6 months. And we expected about 100 person. And David said, do you think it's too much? I said, yeah, I have no clue. I have no clue. We ended up with 300 people in the conference, and we were not able to manage it, actually. So it went forth and back with the rooms in the conference, the rooms for the participants, the venues for the sessions. It was actually, yeah, I don't want to say a nightmare because it was so fantastic, but from the organizer's point of view, it was really a big struggle, but it was a fantastic conference, and I never expected that, to be honest. So thank you to David and GIJN for this effort and your braveness in this, to be honest.
Well, you know, if I can just interject, Asia was the only region of the world that didn't have a regular investigative journalism conference. Every year, journalists in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, North America come together. But this is 60% of humanity. I'd studied in Asia as a student. I'd come back as a correspondent. If we're not addressing Asia, we couldn't call ourselves global. So Torben came to the rescue.
Thank you. So this was also for my media program, actually the point where we started with this conference, and I said, oh, that works out very well. And then I found out we had already investigative manual in Africa. We have a media program in South Africa, Sub-Sahara program as well. And they did 10 years ago or so an investigative manual, and David told me, yeah, sometimes I'm using this for workshops. And we said, oh, then it's time to revise it. So thank God I knew Syed, and he revised the book. Here it is. If you are interested, our booth is behind the wall there. So pick up. We have a lot of them. We don't want to bring it back to our office, which is just 10 minutes from here, but pick it up. Carry as much as you can. It's all for free, of course. It's a big success. Actually, a lot of partners we met during the conferences, for example, from Mongolia, they said, can we translate this in our language? I said, oh, why not? Of course. And now we have this fantastic manual beside English in Mongolian, Indonesian Bahasa, and the newest one, it will be published next week in Nepali, thanks to Kunda Dixit, who I think already left. But so we have Nepali, And upcoming, Yong Jin, Korean, yeah? So this is upcoming Chinese, Spanish, and Tamil, yeah? So whoever of you is interested to translate this in your language, feel free, approach my staff, approach me, or my successor, of course. This book is really worth it. Currently, we're also revising the English version a little bit. But beside the book, there is a website. So you can even go to the website and have a look there. We have a mobile journalism manual, which is also linked, of course, to investigative journalism, because in some areas, the best thing to report is this little mobile phone, because nobody can see it. Yeah. And I think so we did a couple of workshops together with Syed, but in the last 2 years I did 2 trips with Yong Jin, with Syed, Kunda was part of it, and a couple of other senior investigative journalists from this region. And we went to Germany twice to set up a network here in Asia to build some trust between the different countries, between the different investigative journalists, and to come up with new stories. And I think, Syed, you will tell a little bit more about it. So we called it the Watchdog Asia. And I let this to you to tell more about it, but that's actually what we did in the last 5 years.
And it's making a difference. You know, sometimes I say that GIJN's job is building the infrastructure to support investigative journalism around the world. It's not that complicated. You know, it's getting the tools and techniques out there. It's getting the schools involved and updating the curriculum at the journalism academies. It's bringing people together like Torben has done. And now we've got Panama Papers style projects going on in Asia that are directly a result of the investments you've made. So let me bring Syed Nazakat in. Syed is founder of the Center for Investigative Journalism in Delhi. What's your data company? Data Leads? Data Leads, which specializes in health data and works with journalists in the medical industry in India. And he is, my go-to guy in India. The first call, Syed, what do we do? Why don't you give us the overview from Delhi, Syed, and also...
Yeah, I think what Torben said and how Dave started the whole conversation, I think we are having really incredible time as a journalist. I think both as challenges and opportunities. The challenges in way of market pressure, we have seen, I think that is across a global trend, but more in Asia because journalism companies have not invested in their own journalists in terms of skill building and also in terms of their business models. And then suddenly now in the last 1 or 2 years, I saw big companies struggling even to retain their staff. And a lot of investigative journalists actually were the first who were laid off, which was sad. And then there's an immediate physical danger. It's not just about trolling. Like we talk about it all the time, how we face trolling on social media and on blah, 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 is a physical assault. There have been journalists who have been murdered in a broad daylight. I think the number is quite huge. I'm looking at Philippines, I'm looking at even Bangladesh, for example, what's happening with the bloggers. I'm looking at back home in India, for example, we're losing colleagues just because they're writing something, just because they've written an opinion piece on something, leave aside investigative journalism. So I think that situation is very stark in front of a lot of people out there. And we all understand the risks, we all understand the challenges of it. But saying that, I think this is also phenomenally interesting time for investigative journalists. Like I, as a GIJ board member for Asia, I get, I think, hundreds of requests every year from young fellow journalists that they want to be in this field. And some of them came actually to our conferences, and some of them actually won some global grants and fellowships and other stuff. And they went back to their countries and newsrooms, and they created newsrooms, investigative units in their newsroom. I think at least 5 or 10 journalists became the investigative editor in the last 4 or 5 years, just because they came in touch with these lot of mentors and all. So that situation is also there. But I think in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, we're going to see more and more stories coming from Asia, because there are a lot of bad things happening in the region. You know, I was discussing yesterday, the biggest challenge for a journalist is actually getting story ideas. And I think Asia is full of stories, investigative stories. Like we were looking yesterday, there's a Rohingyas there, the migration, internal migration within Asian countries. There's a huge corruption going on. Look at Pakistan, for example, the Prime Minister, the story out there, the Panama Papers. And even China, for that matter, there was one journalist who we couldn't identify, who was an unsung hero of Panama Papers. And that journalist was Chinese, whose identity even today is hidden. And she did remarkable work, and nobody knows her. And she was the only journalist from the Panama team who still remains hidden, because there's a security threat to her life, which is like such a shame. We should have celebrated her work. She should have been, like, it was not easy for her. And so I was very glad also to see a lot of people yesterday again from China here in the conference, because we see there's a lot of work going on there. It's not, I saw the stories on air pollution, which were investigative in nature. So I think there are a lot of stories out there. What will help essentially global investigative journalism in the region is cross-border collaborations. Maybe there are some stories in India which I can't do for some reasons. But a colleague of mine from Bangladesh, a colleague of mine from Pakistan can do that story. I think that has worked in some areas already. Like I remember collaborating with a Nepali journalist about Indian spy agencies' illegal rendition program in that country, in which they picked around 400, 500 suspected terrorists, and those people almost disappeared in different torture cells. And the story would have never been possible without the support and collaboration from a Nepali, because they were picked from Nepal and brought to India illegally and detained for months and years, and some actually disappeared in the torture samples. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And what we actually, at Turban already mentioned, and they suggested that the Asian Investigative Journalism Conference is actually it's like an incredible platform. Like this, I honestly request all of you who are from Asia, you should come to Seoul for this Asian Investigative Journalism Conference, because you are not coming, you're investing into a network. You're building a community of people. What is happening with us, we have been identified, marked, and isolated and targeted. So if we stay as a community, as an investigative journalist, that really helps us each other. That we share stories, network, and all. And what we did last year at Turban has been a great, I think it was completely his idea, that we established Asian Investigative Journalism Network. We call it Watchdog Asia. It's still in a very early stage, where we invited 11 senior editors. You're the 11th one. Yeah, we invited 10 senior editors from 9 Asian countries. And we had this understanding that we need a network where we can share our stories. We can publish our stories in our own respective organizations, but at the same time, we share those stories on that platform. And the membership of that is also open. We are still working on it. It's open to any Asian journalist who is interested in investigative journalism. Yes, David.
Thanks, Syed. What he didn't mention is it was actually not me, but Syed at the breakfast meeting in Yangon who convinced Tarban that he should do this crazy thing and bring Asia's investigative journalists together. It was the right idea at the right time. It wasn't as if we brought this to Asia. There were great journalists in every country waiting to hear what was going on, to link up with their colleagues. And there's almost an evangelical feel when journalists realize that they're not alone, that they have the same problems finding sources, getting access to information, following money across borders. The bad guys went international a long time ago. So what you're hearing is the good guys are starting to catch up. Here's one of the good guys. Yong Jin Kim was a senior producer. He was in charge of the investigative team at the Korean broadcasting system. And he and his colleagues got tired of watching their best stories get killed before they could get on the air. So they did something extraordinary in Korean media, I think in Korean culture generally. They quit and they started their own nonprofit organization, the Korean Center for Investigative Journalism, and a news brand to go with it, New Stuff Up. This has become a runaway success. You're one of the most important news outlets in South Korea today. What's also remarkable, I want to ask you, Yong Jin, about the model you've used, because one, it shows that this is possible in East Asia, and two, that there's a public appetite for this, and three, you did it on a membership model and through broadcasting. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a kind of our success point. Yeah, the video. We do mainly video form investigative story, but now we also do multimedia form. Yeah. But anyway, thank you, Dave. Do we succeed? Huh? The KCIJ has a kind of success now?
You're one of our success stories. Yes, the answer is yes, Yong Jin.
So not yet, but we are trying to succeed. Yeah. Before answering the question, I'd like to tell something concerning the importance of investigative journalism in Korean side and Korean perspective. Let me see. The New York Times columnist Paul Krugman recently wrote in the Times, "The speed of America's moral descent under Donald Trump is breathtaking." I fully understand what he said, because we Koreans have witnessed something very similar 10 years ago, and we had been in a similar situation since President Lee Myung-bak took office in 2008 until next President Park Geun-hye was impeached in last year. Ironically, my center, Korea Center for Investigative Journalism, was born in the Lee Myung-bak regime. The immoral and corrupted regime harshly suppressed the freedom of speech, fair broadcasts, and the people's right to know. So many investigative journalists, including myself, resisted and finally were fired, suspended from their job, their post, or demoted. At that time, I and my colleagues organized the dismissed investigative journalists, then created KCIJ, and resisted the regime only by means of investigative journalism. We continue to expose the corruption and the various problems of the Park Geun-hye regime that followed the Lee Myung-bak regime. And in the middle of 2016, some of the mainstream media start to investigate the suspicious link of Park Geun-hye and the Jaebol, especially Samsung Group, and so-called the Choi Soon-sil is a long-time confidant of President Park. She also very suspicious. So the problem of Park Geun-hye regime has been snowballed and exposed one by one by almost all Korean media. This sparked tremendous anger of Korean people, and the people began to gather with a candle in the square, Gwanghwamun Square and Seoul Square. This was the beginning of a great candlelight revolution, as you guys may know that. And in the end, Park Geun-hye was impeached early last year before she finished her presidential term, and she was expelled from his office. And early elections were held, and a new president, a Democratic leader, came in. and the 2 former presidents are in prison now. Just last year, the Korean Peninsula was at the brink of a war, and now suddenly we are in a completely different world. Just a couple of weeks ago, the so-called Little Rocket Man, Kim Jong-un, and the so-called mentally deranged daughter met here in Singapore, right? Of course, there are going to be a lot of hurdles to jump over, but what a great development for the peace in the Korean Peninsula. I think this is the result of investigative journalism in South Korea, which resulted in the collapse of Park Geun-hye regime and the creation of a new democratic government in South Korea. I think that why the investigative journalism exists, and the mission of investigative journalism is to cause and to bring the positive change in our society and our world. That's our mission, and that's what we did recent years. Yeah.
It's a success. Yeah. Did you tell us yesterday your budget is now $5 million US per year?
Yeah, we are the donation-based membership model, and we have 40,000 members now, and monthly average payment is $15 per member, and we brought in about $5 million last year, just 1 year. That's our revenue, and we are fully independent from any power of government or corporate power. So we are totally independent. So that's the very important thing. We do success investigative journalism. We are independent. Yeah.
The number of members Yong Jin said was 40,000, 40.
Yeah, 40,000.
So don't say this can't happen in Asia. This is actually a model for the entire world, what you've done. Which brings me to our next guest, Richard Hoechner. Richard, his background is in innovation and really making things happen. And there was a group of journalists in Switzerland who wanted to create something similar, an independent base to do investigative journalism that would be self-financed and do stories that the mainstream media simply wasn't getting done. You guys held a crowdfunding campaign that not only surprised yourself, but surprised the world in how successful. They help me out here because I don't have my notes. The original goal was 700,000 Swiss francs, and you raised 2.6 million.
3.5.
What's a million francs when you're crowdfunding? That's extraordinary, and they are often running. Republik magazine has a staff of, I think, 26. You said?
Even more. We're close to 40 right now.
So we're very interested in these new models. How the world is starving for serious, in-depth news. People really do want to know what's happening behind the scenes, and so these experiments like New Stop in Korea and Republik in Switzerland are so important. Richard, tell us how you did it.
How we did it? Well, just to give a little bit of background first, maybe you mentioned that the most difficult thing for journalists is finding stories, but I believe there's also more behind that. In order to follow a story, an investigative story especially, you need to be systematic, you need to have time, and you need resources. Someone needs to pick up the bill, and this is something that is clashing with the reality at a workplace of a journalist all across the world. It's the same in Switzerland. Most people are fighting really hard to report the news, and there's a lot of economic pressure on the news outlets. There have been a lot of jobs lost in that sector, also in Switzerland, and it's got many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that Google and Facebook are soaking up all the ad money around the world, and there's little left for journalism. So we thought we'd give journalism a place on the main stage again, and actually fight with passion so that journalism can be a watchdog again, outside of, or in a new economic logic that doesn't follow the rules of the ad market anymore, but is like an organized movement. And we're very similar to Newstapa in Korea, and our company started basically last year. We have been publishing now for 5 months, and it's incredible if you look around the world where you see these models pop up. It's not just in Switzerland, not just in Korea. You see this in Uruguay, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Germany, all across the world. These models are popping up, and it's truly encouraging to see finally not a depressing story from a newsroom, but something that gives you hope. And we haven't reached our final goal yet. We are still fighting to be able to do our job every day, and we will see in the next months if we will succeed. It's a bet. We don't know yet for sure. But our model is simple. We don't have ads. Our only source of income in the future will be membership. We had some initial financing that we will pay back as soon as we have reached break even. But it's a new model, and it's a model that is making it easier to report, to be systematic, to have time and resources, and to being only accountable to the readers and not to the advertising clients. So let me. What is important in this context is that you rethink, or we spent a lot of time learning from other projects around the world, and to really think about the model, how we can adapt this to our market in Switzerland, and also to rethink our relationship with our members, because it's not just members in this case. It's the people that allow you to do your work. So we actually don't call our members members, we call them publishers. And as of now, we have about 22,000 members. In 5 months that we have published, we also managed to find some, to uncover some dirty stories. And I'll give you an example from this region. Exactly 3 months ago, we published a story from Malaysia with ties to Switzerland. There was a regional minister from Borneo that was embezzling, or allegedly embezzling money and laundering it through a Swiss bank. And so we published this story. We also translated it to English. And our paywall, this is an interesting detail that I would like to share with you. Our paywall is hard. So our page is behind a paywall. Only our members can see it. We want this to be like this so that our members understand the value of it. But, and here's the important thing, our members can share the contents freely. So if you have the link, you can still read it, and this still allows the content to go viral or to go and to be distributed. So this specific story from Malaysia, it got about 250,000 views in the region, in Malaysia, in that month where we published. It was just before the elections in Malaysia. And this is our model. So we have a base of supporters that really believe in our mission. It's not a mass product that we have. We don't have to find hundreds of thousands of people. We just have to find approximately 25,000 people that will support us in the long run, and then we can do our business. And our stories can still have an effect by being distributed through our members and also through other means. So we will actually also, for example, this story, we translated it into English so that it can reach a different public than ours. So our model is not playing anymore, or is refusing to play by the rules of the print and legacy media, but we're designing this specifically for the social internet of today.
I have one little question, but before, let me start with a disclaimer. I'm one of the members or publishers of Republik. Sorry. So you came up with a lot of investigative stories already within 5 months, you said, right? Since you started. So there was, I remember one story from a freelancer. I even know he went to the Philippines and investigated some of the death squads over there. So he really met these people. He wrote a really touching piece about what's going on in there. There is this Malaysian story, which is linked to one of the famous Swiss banks. And there was a local story from Switzerland, actually, about a construction cartel, one of the biggest cartels ever in Switzerland. And you guys published the story. And that had the effect that some of the top candidates for the upcoming elections, they just happened last week, I guess, right? So, but you published the story before, and some of the top candidates from the different parties had to step down. I think even the police president is in trouble, right? And so a lot of people, important people, were affected by this story. But how does it pay off for you in, let's say, membership? Is there some outcome?
Yes, absolutely. So this was a story where we had a lot of impact, and it instantly generated buzz, and it reached new people that hadn't heard about us before, and we saw an immediate hike in subscriptions. In those days, we had about 500 new subscriptions in just over a few days that were clearly linked to that. So we see that our model is paying off. We don't do a lot of marketing. We put our content should be the marketing. Our stories should be our marketing. And if you read a story, you see that it has been gifted to you by one of our readers. But if you want to read the whole thing, you need a subscription, etc., etc., and it works.
Well, and this is the sweet spot here that you're hearing. Syed and Yong Jin are their country's leading investigative journalists. They've each won the highest awards that India and Korea give out. The reason Republik came to our attention is you had Switzerland's best investigative journalists joining this magazine. So these are the industry's best reporters. They're being married with smart and innovative business practices. We've got to get the business end of this down. And so there's a lot of experimentation. We've counted over 150 nonprofit investigative journalism groups worldwide. There's nonprofits, there's online startups. Some groups do events and make money. Some groups sell data and other products. You're hearing a lot about a membership model. Grants and donations, philanthropy is still a big deal in the West. I think it's going to grow here in Asia. And then some groups are still doing ads and sponsorships and getting what they can from that. Listen, we're going to run out of time soon, so if there are questions, can you go to the microphones, please? Or can you give the president the mic, please?
First of all, very interesting panel. Thank you very much. Part of your conversation mentioned a lot of regional organizations helping investigative journalists. What I'm particularly interested to hear from your opinion, when you look at cross-border topics for journalists to address from multiple countries, perhaps, but at least to be able to do a cross-country story, maybe on Mekong River water or something, some other sort of thing. What do you see as some of the top topics that investigative journalists might start to create that kind of camaraderie in cooperative investigative journalism?
How long do we have, sir?
3 minutes.
The great water systems from the Mekong to the Himalayan watershed, the Ganges, and what's happening with climate change, human trafficking, organized crime. Syed, help me out here. Torben.
I think there are so many stories we even don't think about right now. So topic-wise, I think that's almost unlimited. But important is to have the structures, and this is why we set up this Watchdog Asia network to build trust between the reporters coming from different countries. Yeah, so it's not all the countries in Asia, but a lot of countries already from Asia. They know each other even from Uncovering Asia, our conference, which happens here every second year. So I would like to advertise again for Korea this year. But this is important, that the journalists know each other, that they have ideas. Like in Nepal last year, so 2 journalists from Taiwan and from Indonesia, they met on our conference, and they came up with an idea about slavery on fishermen boats in Taiwan. So the people were from Indonesia, and they published a fantastic story about this, which had an impact.
We're so interconnected now. You know, the food we eat for breakfast comes from another country. The toys our kids play with in the afternoon, the medicine we take at night, everything is coming from another place. And we need to have much better structures to be able to follow that. Look at the 1MDB scandal. Almost $1 billion ends up in the private bank account of the Malaysian Prime Minister from Saudi Arabia, and US authorities are investing because it goes through an American bank, and you guys are looking at a Swiss bank. Every story has got border crossing implications.
I completely agree on that, but I really like the question, because I think it's really important to identify the topics very clearly. Climate change, certainly one of the best topics to do cross-border, because we just don't have skills to understand what's happening. We have no idea. Just last week, we had a mud rain in Delhi, and nobody understands where this mud is coming from. And there's a whole mud coming down on houses and other stuff. And we have floods almost every year now, and millions of people are getting dislocated. Look at Bangladesh, what's happening. We have no understanding what is happening. And there's genuine territorial conflict and armed conflict on climate change. So it has really huge dimensions, but somehow in newsrooms, we don't have journalists who can tell this story. And I think also stories related to terrorism are really cross-border, because people are using different territories in Asia, whether they are right-wing, left-wing, whatever, but armed groups. So for example, in India, we have a state called Northeast. The people who are running the armed insurgency in that group are based in Myanmar for the last 20 years. And people who are running camps in Kashmir are based in Pakistan. And so some people who are still trying to do violence in India, in Punjab, they're based in Canada. Our topmost wanted terrorists are based in Canada. And so a lot of cross-border, possibilities. But I think that is one of the reasons why Watchdog Asia was established. The aim was only to identify the topics very clearly.
One of the things we do at our conferences is we have open networking sessions so that journalists from different countries can brainstorm. My favorite story was on the cucumber mafia. There's a guy from Iceland who said, we've got these super violent gangs here that we call them the cucumber mafia. I think they're from Lithuania. Guy from Lithuania raises his hand and says, we know these people. Guy from Germany says, we've got the cucumber. Suddenly there's a cucumber mafia task force of journalists. We've got to do a lot more like that. Okay, Howie. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Howie Severino from the Philippines. The panel has mostly been talking about the membership model for sustaining investigative reporting in their countries, especially Switzerland and Korea. I was wondering if they considered other models, such as approaching grant donors or foundations. And in one of the panels yesterday, there was a similar discussion, and the gentleman from Hawaii described their funding, and the bulk of their funding came from the billionaire Pierre Omidyar. And I'm wondering if they've tried to approach billionaires in their countries to sustain, wouldn't that be a more efficient and less time-consuming way of trying to finance their efforts? Or do they see a downside to that? And just hypothetically, if you were
Right.
offered like a kind of a lifetime endowment from a billionaire in your respective countries, would you accept it?
Were it only that easy, huh?
Okay, one good thing, as we were saying at the start, because a lot of people appreciate what investigative journalism is for the democracy, what it means really. Like in India, for example, for the first time ever, a couple of philanthropists came together and they started a grant. I think it was I'm not really sure about the money, but it was huge. Couple of millions, 10 million or something, I'm not really quite sure, but it's a huge grant, which supported at least 8 or 9 different journalism organizations, startups. But I'm not actually a non-profit. I'm not non-profit as an organization. We run a company called Data Leads, which earns money for profit, and then we put that money on the Center for Investigative Journalism. So my model is not the membership, is not based on grants. So we work as a profit company, earn money under Data Leads, and we use that money to support Center for Investigative Journalism in India.
I believe that independence is one of the most important goods for any journalist, and if you are depending on a generous billionaire, that makes you dependent, and that is a problem. And these billionaires might not be everywhere. So for us, it was really important to design and to explore and experiment with a business model that we think could be replicable and sustainable on the long term. But having said that, we did a mix of those two. So for the initial funding, we found 3 investors that are public. They are doing it not just out of philanthropy, but because they want an investment that is safe, and they saw our numbers and said that's calculated well. So this helped us for the start phase. And also it was, when we did our crowdfunding last year, we could say that, you know, we already secured initial funding, but we need a market test. So prove to us that you want this, and then we actually tied the money from the investors to the market test. So without the crowdfunding, we wouldn't have started.
Yong Jin?
We do not consider to accept any grant from big foundation or philanthropies because we pursue the perfect independence. But we are trying to get another source of revenue, like making documentary movie. We already made 2 movies last year in the 2016 and got pretty big money from the movie. And we are considering to write the books, from book selling. Yeah, that's the another way to get the revenue, yeah.
Most groups that are nonprofit around the world do depend on the philanthropic model. Not billionaires so much like Omidyar, but he has a foundation, the Omidyar Network. GIJN is more than 90% funded by foundations. Ford Foundation, Open Society. We've got a list of about 10 on our site. So they're an important part of the mix. Oh, you didn't say that you're a key member of the Philippines Center for Investigative Journalism. PCIJ was the first of these groups in Asia. You guys started in 1989, right? And that shows this model is durable. You guys have found a way to make it work. Okay, I think we got time for one more question. Ma'am, can you go to the microphone, please?
Thank you. I'm Mardia from Indonesia. The story that you mentioned about slavery fishermen, we did that with help with Free Press Unlimited Fellowship. And there are 2 stories that cross border. That one fisherman slavery. The second is about human trafficking with Malaysia, Kenya. So what I'm asking is about, it's not really question, but comment. In journalism, especially investigative journalism, women are very rare. So women stereotyping being covering education, health section, environment. So I'm quite disappointed that this is all male panels. So I'm sorry. And the second, As my question about, do we have security safety net when journalists happen to have risky their life, their job, their injury, their fortune while doing investigative report, especially in the remote areas, such as in the deep of Kalimantan, in Papua. These are very risky. Do we have security nets to help them in time needed, such as some? That's all. Thank you.
There was one question about the panel. Ma'am, let me tell you that we have a team of 17 people, and out of 17, 15 are women journalists in our newsroom. So it doesn't really reflect that, oh, this is like the gender issue. There's certainly not a gender issue. And one of our journalists who got awarded last year was a woman journalist from India. And I'm actually very glad, to be honest. I've never seen so many women coming forward and interested pursuing investigative journalism. Like, we get applications, a majority of them, again, are actually women journalists. So I really don't believe in this gender debate everywhere, that every panel should have a male member and then there should be a female on the net. It doesn't really work that way. In journalism, it's, oh, you're a journalist, you're not a male and female journalist. I really don't believe this debate that we always should have a female in the panel or male in the panel. It doesn't really work that way. So there are good journalists, bad journalists that we take. So that was the one. And second was about the security, whether there's a...
Well, wait. Let me
and David will take that question.
Let me follow up on the all-male panel here. If I did this at GIJN, my board would decapitate me. And we're happy to work with you on diversity.
We've tried to get women in every panel, and I hope you've noticed that.
About half of the attendants at our conferences are women, and my own staff is mostly women, including our management, and they are powerful drivers of this movement around the world. They head many of these centers, so don't let this panel mislead you. You want to talk about safety real quick? Well, look, we have big brothers and sisters who are much bigger than we are, that specialize in safety. The Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Sans Frontières, and we do a lot of referrals to them. They've grown quite large in the last couple of years. It's still a huge job. We're under fire almost everywhere now, and I know it's extremely dangerous in places like Kalimantan. If you look at the data from CPJ, the journalists who are getting killed are not in war zones. They're beat reporters who are doing local coverage. They're covering corruption, politics.
And Dave, I want to add one thing. You know, security is really, I think, one of the key challenges for investigative journalists. So I think I saw a lot of people posting pictures. It's fun, actually. But be very careful on your Facebook and on Twitter. If you're an investigative journalist, I will suggest just don't use Facebook at all. Don't have a profile. I don't know, we just heard about Shujat. We paid him tribute a day before. He was a classmate and a good friend. He got assassinated a fortnight ago. One of the reasons was actually the Facebook. So be very careful. I think that is the one best security you can have. Just be very careful what you do on your social media.
All right, we can't end on such a depressing note. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and there is strength in numbers. We're getting stories out that never would have seen the light of day because we're linking up across borders, and there are more and more platforms. We're getting larger and better at what we do. Please join us, and thank you so very much.